webinar on manufacturing reshoring. Let me just begin with reminding everybody that you need to keep your phones muted and your computer audio off. Basically the format today is we're going to give our sponsors, I'm going to introduce our sponsors, and they're going to get a chance to say a few things, and then we're going to turn it over to Anirban, who is going to cover the topic, and then of course we want to jump into the questions and answers. I want everybody to understand that to use the chat to submit your questions for consideration, and feel free to submit during the program. So anytime during the program you've got a question, go ahead and submit it. Stacy and I will be keeping track of those, and at the appropriate time we'll bring those questions up to Anirban. So at this time, again, I want to thank the sponsors, but first and foremost, a special thank to Sage Policy Group and its chair, Anirban Basu, for partnering with us on the New Directions for Maryland Manufacturing Initiative. And just a quick word about this. These seminars are actually the launching pad for what we hope to be a more in-depth, substantive movement to identify the new reality of where we're going. Anirban and I talked about this a while back, and we think that it's critically important now more than ever to better define the value of manufacturing to their state's economy, the need to make it a priority, and in particular to address the unemployment situation by trying to connect those jobs in manufacturing with this whole new group of folks that are unemployed. That's just a snapshot of it. You'll hear more about that later on. The webinar is a four-part series. It's one, again, of many activities. And we have a few companies or organizations who stepped up to support us bringing this specific webinar to you. And I think everybody understands, and I know we have a number of people online with nonprofits. All nonprofits have had to pivot. We're all in the same situation, in that we're looking at new ways of creating value in the marketplace. Obviously, webinars is the avenue of choice right now, but I think we're going to see in the future some other, maybe more innovative and creative ways of connecting with folks. So I wanted to say to the sponsors, it's so very, very important to have you with us to supporting this. So let me begin with the Maryland Department of Commerce. Everybody knows, we're definitely married to the Department of Commerce and the great work they're doing and advocating for manufacturing. And I think we have Tamar on the line. So Tamar, could you talk a little bit, please, about Maryland Department of Commerce and any messages you have for us today?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tamar Osterman. I'm with the Maryland Department of Commerce, which is the state's economic development agency. So our mission is business attraction, retention, and expansion throughout the state. I'm part of the regional business development team. There are 12 of us out in the field. I'm based in Frederick and Carroll counties, and we support businesses out here across industries with state and other resources. But the Department of Commerce is, of course, much larger than what we do in the field, and a lot of that relates directly back to manufacturing. We value our ongoing partnership with RMI as well as with MD-MEP and the Maryland World Class Consortia. And we have a strategic industry sector team, including manufacturing, whose job is to think large and work with our partners on an ecosystem level to build manufacturing. As many of you know, we just completed 2 rounds of a manufacturing grant to companies that are pivoting production toward making PPE. The most recent round we gave out to, I think, 25, 26 companies, and $1.5 million total. We also, of course, have an Office of International Investment and Trade relative to the whole issue of reshoring, where we try to work to help our Maryland businesses promote their products overseas, as well as encourage direct foreign investment here. So we'll be interested to hear that. And Mike, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the group.
Thank you for joining us today. And we love Western Maryland. We love Frederick. So and the work that everyone does out there with manufacturing, particularly Jody. At this time, we have a representative from Hamatro, Heidi Falter. Heidi, you were in were you in her fashion show, by the way?
I was not, but our assembly team member was, who's also a volunteer firefighter.
Okay. Thanks for your support for that too.
Absolutely. It was, we loved it, and we are framing pictures and hanging it all over the building. So it was a great time. Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. I'm Heidi. I'm the marketing coordinator here at Hamatro. We have been manufacturing Glen Burnie for over 35 years. We always offer tours when everything is back to normal. We'd love to have you in, check out our facilities. And we're also hiring during this time period, which is a great thing to mention. If you know anyone looking for work in assembly or starting out in manufacturing, we're always looking ourselves on being able to be part of saving lives every day and what we make. And please remember to donate to your local firefighters and fire departments to help keep them afloat and keep them ready to serve our communities.
Okay. By the way, Heidi, I want to let you know I was on the phone with Matt Tisdale, who's the president for First National Bank for Mid-Atlantic, and we were discussing new direction. And he made a comment about, which we all know, people need to learn more about manufacturing. He specifically talked about Hamatro as an example of what people needed to see. And our friend John Freeberger is on the line. And John, we want to thank you too for all your support over the years. I just pressed a button, and so now I'm having trouble finding my way. So hold on, folks. I gotta exit full screen. And okay, got my script back, excuse me. All right, well, and another great partner of RMI is PNC Bank. PNC has been affiliated with, and we're gonna introduce Scott Nicholson, but Scott, I just want you to know that Laura Gamble goes back with our events for many, many, many years. And we've appreciated very much, not just this sponsorship, but the sponsorship that PNC has provided to our industry over the years through RMI events.
It's definitely been a great partnership, and we feel very, very good about it. And before I get started, I just want to, I've got 5 kids and 3 dogs sucking on Wi-Fi and creating distractions. So if you hear any large crashes, that's, we've got a lot of commotion going on today. But when Stacy first reached out to Dave Schwing and I about this opportunity, we jumped at it. To your point, Laura Gamble and RMI go back a long way. It's a great organization, and these are great presentations for Dave and I to go back to our customers with this information that we learn. Obviously, Anirban does a great job keeping us informed and humoring us along the way, which is always fun. And so I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what PNC does in the market. Dave touched on a few things last session, but so PNC came into the Baltimore market back in 2006 when they acquired Mercantile Bank, and they came into the DC market when they acquired Riggs Bank shortly thereafter, like 2008 or 9. And in Baltimore, it's been great because we had this mercantile culture set up already. And Laura's a big part of that, Laura Gamble, who is our regional president. But the way PNC is set up, we have different markets across the country, but we all operate autonomously within our market. So Baltimore, Laura Gamble heads up, Dave and I are part of that market. And so we have kind of our own small company in Baltimore. So we operate as a small local bank within the PNC umbrella. So my day-to-day business is taking care of my clients and building my book of business. And then once we have clients in the door, we have a team around us, whether it's wealth management, financial planning, 401k, merchant services. And we have a great product called Workplace Banking, which allows our customers to offer the same benefits than PNC employees get to their customers. So it's basically a free product that PNC offers their clients. They roll it out as a free benefit to their clients, and they're able to get free checks, preferred rates, and they have a refer employee program as well. So we're excited for the sponsorship. If Dave and I can be of any help to any of your companies or your clients, we'd love to talk to them about banking. And we thank you again for RMI for the sponsorship opportunity, and we look forward to the presentation and hope you guys have a great weekend.
Okay, thanks, Scott. And now to another Scott, Scott Phillips, who is with the MBDA Mid-Atlantic Minority Manufacturing Center, and also representing a new initiative called My Hub. Scott, 60 seconds, okay?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? Hello, everyone. Happy Friday to everyone. The Minority Business Development Agency is actually 50 years old, moving into 51 years old. And it was founded in the wake of the 1968 unrest to focus on building wealth in the minority entrepreneurial community. We're focused on working specifically in the manufacturing industry. We have a number of firms here in the Mid-Atlantic. And I really want to thank Mike for something that we call intentional inclusivity, right? Being intentionally inclusive. And that is the partnership and the relationship that we hold with RMI. July 13th is our next My Hub Monday. We invite you all to participate. Mike will make sure you get that information. We had a really great session with IBM recently on monitoring the workplace post-COVID-19. So really good information we'd like to share. And Mike, once again, thank you for allowing us to be your strategic partner in this work.
Well, you know, it's an effort of love, and you know that because we reconnected right after Freddie Gray, and with some church leaders and business leaders, and with manufacturing, and you were the one that said, let's do a grant and get things going. So Scott, a lot of credit to you. All right. Well, listen. Oh, one other thing is Eddie Resende. I'm not sure if he's on the line from World Trade Center Institute. I just want to thank Eddie and WTCI. They're a good partner of RMI, and I want to thank them for joining us as a partner in this event. So, Anirban, it's your turn. So let's hear about reshoring. By the way, this entire session is being recorded, and everybody will have an opportunity to take a look at it on our website after it's over with. So at this time, I want to introduce Anirban Basu, who's going to enlighten us about reshoring. Is it real? Is it happening? What should we be doing?
Right. So thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Peter, the entire RMI team. Thanks to all the sponsors for making this possible, and thanks to all of you for being with me. My job is to talk about reshoring today. This is, as some of you are aware, the second in a series of 3 webinars. That first webinar, we focused on the economy, and we focused on the impacts of COVID-19 on the economy. And what we said was, we said a number of things, but one of them was that things are in flux. The world is changing very rapidly. And of course, with change comes challenge, but also with change comes opportunity. And reshoring strikes us, many of us, as one of those opportunities. So this is, as I say, the second in a set of 3 webinars. The last one, which I believe takes place later this month, will focus on things Maryland has to do to take advantage of some of these emerging trends. How we can use these emerging trends to diversify and grow our economy, including our middle class. So new directions for Maryland manufacturing. The topic of the day, the topic du jour, is reshoring. So let's talk about that. Just a very brief definition. I think you know what reshoring is, right? But it's more than manufacturing, as it turns out. We associate with manufacturing often because that's the industry that has departed most aggressively from America's shores abroad, whether to China, Mexico, other places. But we know that a lot of IT jobs, service sector jobs, including accounting jobs, many others have been offshored as well. A company's decision to reshore can be encouraged through favorable business conditions, the skilled workforce, and incentives encouraging innovative manufacturing practices. We're going to talk about all of these issues today, but it's very helpful to have the Department of Commerce on the line because they're a big part of this. Because we've got to be able to tell the Maryland story, and I'll come back to the Maryland story many times during this webinar, but certainly late in the webinar as well, and then I'll take questions from you all. There are opportunities for the private sector, various levels of government, and partnerships between the two to create an environment supporting reshoring. And we're going to talk about whether or not that environment exists in Maryland right now later on. And our third webinar actually is focused on things that have to happen in Maryland, changes, to allow us to take advantage of some of the changes in the global economy, trade patterns, so on and so forth, and take advantage, as it turns out, of reshoring itself. Now, one can understand why a lot of policymakers haven't placed a lot of emphasis on manufacturing or growing manufacturing employment. This is a graph of US manufacturing employment back to January of 1939. You can see here, since the late 70s, early 80s, it has not been a source of net new job growth. Indeed, if you look at the post-COVID-19 manufacturing employment level, May 2020, I shouldn't say post, it's actually during the pandemic, but you can see here that basically employment in manufacturing in the US is back to where it was in 1941. So, when educators or policymakers think about manufacturing, they say, well, why would I spend time trying to get kids to go into that part of the economy? I want to push them into health services, IT, cybersecurity, those kinds of fields. That's where the growth is. And you can understand some of this. But again, the world is changing. Now, if we want to look at Maryland manufacturing employment, and of course we do, this is what's happened since 1990. And again, you can understand why it's been such a struggle to get people interested in this sector of the economy. I am interested in the sector of the economy for many reasons, but number one factor is that it creates wealth. I'm a service provider. You may or may not like me, but I can tell you this, I create no wealth for this economy, zero. I create no wealth. I don't produce anything. I just sit in front of this computer all day long, but I just turn it on and then I turn it off at the end of the day. Nothing new exists. But manufacturing, construction, mining, including energy, and then agriculture, those four sectors of the economy really stand out as wealth producers. They take inputs that aren't worth a lot as inputs, translate that into outputs that are worth a lot. Automobiles, airplanes, chemicals, whatever it happens to be. And so one of the ways a society can build wealth, and we've been talking a lot about building wealth in various communities the last few weeks, haven't we? One of the ways to build wealth is to emphasize those sectors of the economy that actually generate wealth. And economists, and we love economists, of course we do. My mother loves economists. But we don't generate any new wealth. You do as manufacturers. Now, things have changed. So this is manufacturing employment in Maryland back to 1990. I love this graphic. Mike just showed some of us who are on the on this call his picture from 1950, and you can see these data back to 1950. This is Maryland employment by industry, and look who's at the top here. What's at the top? Manufacturing, right? This is a time of a very muscular Maryland economy, one that's not simply dependent upon federal government outlays or federal government contract. Nothing against federal government outlays or federal government contracting. But at that time, we had this very diversified economy that included many industries, including a larger agricultural sector, manufacturing, so on and so forth. We had companies, many manufacturing companies. So Black & Decker comes to mind. Black & Decker, which built its first manufacturing plant in Towson in 1917, actually would then go on after several decades to build another manufacturing plant, a major one in Easton, Maryland in 1974. We were building new plants, large-scale plants. Even when that plant was shuttered in 2002, it still had 1,300 employees. That's a lot of middle-class jobs to have lost. But back in 1950, the story is very different. Number one sector is manufacturing. And when you manufacture products, you have to distribute those products. So not surprisingly, the number two sector here is wholesale and retail trade. That's your distributors. And those distributors need transportation services. So guess what? The third leading sector is transportation. So that's where we were in 1950, but of course the story has changed. I'm not saying that we can get back there, but I am saying that we can certainly push manufacturing employment higher going forward. If you look at today, the 10 largest employers in Maryland, you will not find a manufacturer among them. What will you find? A lot of federal agencies, National Institutes of Health, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, U.S. Social Security Administration. Hey, nothing against those sectors, but that's part of Maryland's enormous dependence upon federal government outlays. Now, this is a federal government that had a $23.5 trillion national debt deficit, aggregate debt, coming into the crisis. And this is our lifeline. I don't want to use the word sugar daddy. That seems offensive, but that's sort of that's who's sort of driving our economy. I mean, look at where the wealthiest places are in Maryland. It's Montgomery County, parts of Prince George's County like Mitchellville. certainly Howard County. A lot of those communities derive their strength from federal government outlays. That's where you see so much wealth in that part of the state. You don't see it in Allegheny County. You don't see it in Somerset County. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, spreading the wealth, not by taxing people more aggressively and spreading it. No, by creating more investments, more activities in those segments of the economy that create wealth, like manufacturing, and in parts of the state that have been left behind, like Chrisfield, Maryland, Cumberland, Maryland, so on and so forth. Again, we'll talk more about this. So what happened? Economies of scale. So at first, new mass production methods created a lot of job opportunities in America. And this really emerges in the late 19th century and allowed American manufacturers to decrease output while decreasing production costs. So the game here was scale. You wanted big factories, and you wanted big companies, Ford, General Motors, massive factories, because the larger the factory, the greater the economies of scale, and the further you went down the average cost curve. The more units you make, the lower is average cost. And therefore, you can enter the marketplace with a lower average cost and therefore charge lower prices and still more than break even. American manufacturers continue to benefit from productivity and cost competitiveness that contributed through the Industrial Revolution up into the latter half of the 20th century. But something happens in the latter half of the 20th century, after 1950. After a decade of significant offshoring in the 2000s, the cost savings that American firms had enjoyed by offshoring production began to erode around 2010. So somehow between 1950 into the 1960s and 1970s, we lost our advantage. We can argue why that was. Some people might point to unions. I'm not pointing to anybody, by the way, but some might point to that. Some might point to anti-business legislation. Some might just point to the fact that China was emerging. Mexico was emerging with new infrastructure and available workers and a willingness to train workers for manufacturing jobs, something many American institutions do not do. But now things are changing back again. The pendulum is swinging back as a result of increasing costs and other factors overseas that we'll get into. Some of the manufacturing that previously took place away from U.S. shores has already returned and continues to return to America. So, MAUSA, what's a MAUSA? A majority-owned U.S. affiliate is a MAUSA. And so these are affiliates of multinational enterprises, MNEs. And this just gives you a graphical element regarding total manufacturing employees in China among these US affiliates from 2009 and 2017. Here's what we saw coming out of the previous economic downturn. And I've heard, by the way, some skepticism regarding the idea of reshoring. Because during the Great Recession, what happened? Money disappeared. Money disappeared. From the value of people's homes, from bank balance sheets, money disappeared. And all of a sudden, when there's not as much money to go around, you've got to work that much harder to cut costs. So if you're trying to cut costs, one of the ways to do that is to put even more manufacturing employment or more manufacturing activity in China. At least that used to be the mantra. And it has been the mantra probably since the 1970s or 1980s. If you were a CEO of a major US manufacturing company and you were not offshoring to China, you were missing it. What are you doing? What point are you trying to make? If you want to be a profit maximizer, you have to be a cost minimizer. And the way to be a cost minimizer is head east to China. And we actually saw it. At this point, Donald Trump is a TV star. We're not really talking about reshoring. And we're not talking about bringing manufacturing back. And we're not talking about trade wars, all these kinds of things. What businesses are thinking about is simply efficiency, cost reduction, so on and so forth. Now, again, these data only go through 2017. I'm not trying to hide anything from you. But reshoring has really come back. And it's really a quite recent phenomenon, which is important for Mike and everybody else to realize, because we have an opportunity here in Maryland to jump on the curve relatively early. In 2018, the combined reshoring and related foreign direct investment, so that's investment by foreign companies into America to conduct manufacturing activities, those announcements remain strong, adding more than 145,000 jobs in the US, the second highest annual rate on record. This brings the total number of announced manufacturing jobs brought to the US from offshore to more than 757,000 since the manufacturing employment low of 2010. Now, let's do some simple math. If we get 2% of that, if we got, our state is about 2% of the national economy. If we got 2% of 800,000, if I'm doing my math correctly, that by itself would be 16,000 jobs in manufacturing coming back to Maryland. And that's one of the ways. Now, have 16,000 jobs come back? I'm going to point out, no, they have not, because we haven't gotten our fair share. Or maybe we have gotten our fair share, we haven't gotten the share we would have wanted. But additionally, the number of companies reporting new reshoring and foreign direct investment was at its highest level in history in 2018, up 38% from 2017 to 1,389 companies. Look, this new wave is emerging. Things are changing very, very quickly, and COVID-19 accelerates this trend. Because with COVID-19 comes a set of supply chain disruptions and gives further reason to corporate CEOs or decision makers generally to bring more of their production back home, where their clients exist, where their customers are. This is the Carney US Reshoring Index, and it shows that US companies are leaving China. Look, I'm not saying I have anything against China. That's not what this is about. This is about how we can broaden prosperity in America. I think we have to let the Chinese worry about China. We worry about America, and we worry about Maryland. We worry about Baltimore and Cumberland and Cambridge and Crisfield and all the rest of it. The Carney's Reshoring Index recently revealed a dramatic reversal of a 5-year trend as domestic US manufacturing in 2019 commanded a rising share versus 14 Asian low-cost countries, or LCCs, tracked in their study, with manufacturing imports from China registering a particularly sharp decline. The supply chain is moving back home, or at least it's moving out of China. In 2019, imports of manufactured goods from 14 Asian low-cost country offshore trading partners shrunk to $757 billion from $860 billion in 2018, a 7.2% decrease. So it's not just about China. US gross domestic product or output in manufacturing was virtually unchanged in 2019 versus 2018. Remember, 2019 was a tough year for manufacturing. For 5 months late last year, US manufacturing was in recession. Trade wars, strong US dollar, somewhat static US auto industry, and then the issues at Boeing. But actually imports fell quite quickly. And that's becoming more of a long-lived trend. 2019 saw companies that actively adapting to what they felt like a major disruption. The US-China trade war by reducing imports of manufactured goods from China while increasing manufactured imports from other countries in Asia, as well as from Mexico. Ultimately, obviously, the goal is not to shift the supply chain from China to Malaysia. That's fine, but we want to move it from China to Cumberland. So where does reshoring and foreign direct investment come from? Top 10 countries cumulatively from 2010 to 2018. Well, you can see China. I mean, that's no surprise. China is responsible for a quarter of the world's manufacturing. So there's more jobs to be reshored back to America. So the first set of columns is reshoring. The second set of columns is foreign direct investment. So that's Chinese companies investing in America to do their manufacturing here, or German companies, Japanese companies, so on and so forth. Which segments do we see the most reshoring in? Number one, transportation equipment. That includes your auto manufacturing. But it also includes tractors, farm equipment, so on and so forth. Computer electronics products. Why does this matter, this list? Because these are all high value added segments. And these are segments. I mean, you think about the typical auto worker or the typical person who's working in the computer sector, even the computer manufacturer assembling sector or the electronics sector. A lot of engineers, a lot of technicians, electrical equipment, appliances and components, chemicals, that's your pharmaceutical industry. And by the way, because of this public health crisis, the Trump administration implemented, as many people know here, tariffs on steel and aluminum in the name of national security. And so those tariffs applied broadly. Some nations ultimately got exemptions from those tariffs, but that was the notion behind those 25% tariffs. We need to produce more steel and aluminum in America to protect ourselves. Well, it certainly must be the case if we are now in an era of pandemics, that America needs to think about producing more of its medicines here, whether generic or name brand drugs. So, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, that part of the economy, I mean, my guess is that comes back very strongly, whether from India or China. Look at number 6 here, ladies and gentlemen, apparel and textiles. Are you kidding me? I thought all that was made in Bangladesh. Well, but some of it's being reshored. You can see how many jobs, nearly 39,000 have come back. That's reshoring, jobs coming back because Apparently, we Americans can do these things. If we're trained to do them, we can do these things. More data here. As in previous years, FDI continued to exceed reshoring in terms of total jobs added, but reshoring has continued to close the gap since 2015. So the red line there is foreign direct investment. Jobs relate to foreign direct investment. The blue line is reshoring. So as it turns out, it is still the case that in most years, more jobs come from foreign companies investing in America than American companies bringing back production home. But as I say, reshoring has been progressing at a similar rate as FDI since 2016, suggesting, I put this in italics, that US headquartered companies are starting to understand the same benefit to US production that foreign companies have understood over the last few years. American CEOs are finally getting it. Took a while, didn't it? And by the way, the 2018 data looks like a bit of a dip in terms of reshoring and FDI. These are incomplete data. So the Reshoring Initiative, and that's who provides these data. By the way, you should go to their website. They have phenomenal information on these things, and I'm sharing some of that information with you in summary form. But the 2018 data are likely to be revised upward. So that's why you see that dip, and that's that third bullet makes that point. One of the policies pursued by socialist nations before and after World War II was something called import substitution. So instead of importing things the Indians thought from England, we'll make it ourselves, whether automobiles or whatever it happens to be. Now, I'm not advocating for socialist policies. What I am saying is that it is conceivable that a nation could generate wealth by replacing imports with domestic production. So imports declined sharply last year. The manufacturing import ratio fell to 12.1%, meaning that the US market imported 12.1 cents worth of offshore production from Asian low-cost countries for every $1 of domestic manufacturing gross output. And you can see what the trend has been, what it was in 2008, and then coming out of the Great Recession, this explosion in dependence on Asian imports, except last year was different. This reduction in the manufacturing import ratio was the first since 2011. We are still at the very early stages of this. And that's why you can understand why some people would remain skeptical. I am not, because there are reasons for reshoring. Now, where are they reshored? Where are the jobs reshored? The Southeast and Texas get the most and on average the largest reshoring and FDI projects, presumably due to right-to-work laws and typically lower property costs, wage rates, taxes, and energy costs. So part of this is, again, to be a profit maximizer, one has to be a cost minimizer. Texas is really good at cost minimizing or helping people cost minimize. And so, and they have certain advantages. They have lots of land. They have lots of land. The Midwest, led by Michigan, is second based on reshoring to its strong industrial base. Michigan is not a southern state. Happens to be a right-to-work state today, now, joining Indiana. But it's not a southern state, and it's not an inexpensive place in which to live. From 2010 to 2018, 58% of total jobs due to reshoring and FDI were in the South, 21% in the Midwest, 10% in the Northeast, and 10% were in the West. Maryland, our beautiful state, ranks 40th in terms of aggregate jobs from reshoring, 2,195 from 65 companies. How many should we have gotten? As we are 2% of the nation's economy, 16,000. How many did we get? Less than 2,200. Who ranked just ahead of us at 39th? Rhode Island. Rhode Island, which has a population barely above 1 million, it's a bit more popular than Delaware. Delaware is still chasing 1 million people. We're 6 million people, and we had less reshoring here and FDI here in the aggregate than Rhode Island. So clearly, during that third webinar, we need to talk about what Maryland needs to do to get into this game in earnest. South Carolina, by the way, ranks first. Well, South Carolina is just a few states away. Are they better than us? Is the University of South Carolina better than the University of Maryland? I don't think so. I don't think Gamecocks are better than Terrapins. It's a stupid name that they have. Our name makes sense. So, but for some reason, we cannot cobble together our advantages to make a more compelling story. And my very strong sense is, you may disagree, we'll talk about this during Q&A, is that when a lot of companies are thinking about reshoring production to America, they're not even thinking about Maryland. Maryland with its Port of Baltimore and Trade Point Atlantic, Maryland with its access to I-95 and I-70, the Eastern Seaboard with its large labor force, all that. They don't even think about us. Well, why not? We must be doing something wrong. But reshoring is simply a response to macroeconomic factors. And what I'm trying to suggest to you is that these macroeconomic factors are now inducing CEOs who previously moved jobs abroad to bring them back home. One is that those wages abroad, including in China, are rising. And I'll show you a graph on that in a moment. There's fluctuating currency values to think about. So when, if I've got part of my supply chain or all of it in China or India or wherever, I've got to think about the value of the rupee or the renminbi or the peso or wherever it happens to be, the taka or whatever it happens to be. Labor productivity or gains in output per manufactured worker is also commonly cited as a significant factor in terms of total manufacturing costs. So one of the things we need, and we've been saying this, it's obvious, but we need a more productive manufacturing workforce. We need better training and education. And part of that is that we've got to convince the best and brightest Americans that jobs in manufacturing are our first choice, But often that's not what they're presented with. They're presented with, that's not a choice at all. You want to go into something else. The reduction of US energy costs from 2004 to 2014, and part of that was related to the shale boom, especially in energy-dependent industries such as iron and steel and chemical industries, also made reshoring a cheaper option for certain manufacturers. And by the way, we are the world's leading oil producer. We are the world's leading natural gas producer. We are making enormous strides in solar and wind energy. And so energy represents another factor behind this reshoring that we're observing. Here's average yearly wages in manufacturing China from 1978 to 2019. It's a parabola. This is one of the reasons all of a sudden that cost differential that existed in the 1980s into the 1990s isn't nearly what it was. But here's the problem. So yeah, the Chinese worker is becoming more expensive, but the American worker is not becoming more productive. That's the problem. That's why we haven't been able to fully capitalize. This is year-over-year percentage change in labor productivity. Now, labor productivity is typically measured as output per hour worked. Output per hour worked. And look what's been happening recently to manufacturing labor productivity. It's not rising, it's falling. And do you know why this is, ladies and gentlemen? It's because people the age of Mike Galeazzo are retiring in larger numbers. The baby boomers are a wildly productive generation. A lot of the baby boomers actually entered manufacturing as their #1 choice. Some of them may have realized that they like to work with their hands and minds in shop class. Obviously, there are a lot more manufacturing opportunities out there coming out of high school or college or graduate school. And so manufacturing for many of those folks was viewed as a first choice. But it has not been marketed that way, presented that way for a long time. And maybe that's why you don't see this. Another factor, though, may be that businesses are not investing enough in their workers, workforce training. And there is a systemic reason to not invest sufficiently in your workers. You say, why is that, Anirban? That doesn't make any sense. Yes, it does. I'll tell you why. Because training is expensive. And if I pour a lot of energy into training a worker, what I might be doing is I might be training my competitor's best worker of the future. So what I might have a temptation to do is, instead of actively working to train my workers on the job or through apprenticeship programs or whatever it happens to be, what I might instead do is cherry pick. So I wait for my competitors to train their workers, and then I try to pick off their best workers. And that turns out to be cheaper. The problem is that everyone has that incentive. So American industry is structurally oriented towards under-training. And historically, what's happened is there's a partnership between government and the private sector to try to offset that market imperfection. But it's something we need to think about going forward, and the productivity figures don't lie. We're getting less output per hour work for manufacturing workers, and therefore not able to fully take advantage of this growth in Chinese manufacturing costs. So the reshoring initiative has tracked factors companies cite for reshoring for those years 2010 to 2018. Top 10 negative factors, top reasons why bad things are happening abroad, causing them to want to come back home. The quality of product, the need to rework product, warranty issues, freight costs, total cost, delivery, inventory, rising wages, supply chain interruptions and natural disaster risk, political instability, like you might see in a place like Cambodia or some other places around the world. Green considerations, right? There are a lot of CEOs want to be environmentally sound. Perhaps it's better, easier to do that in North America. Intellectual property risk is a big one, and a big topic of discussion during the US-China trade discussions. And of course, communications, just having your folks close together so they can communicate, talk about issues, and learn as they're doing. Top 10 positive factors, government incentives. I mean, the Department of Commerce is on the call. Government incentives matter. So perhaps one of the reasons that Rhode Island ranks ahead of us is that their government has said, we need to take advantage of this. Proximity to customers and market. Well, we're Maryland. We have proximity to customers. Skilled workforce. Well, we're among the smartest people in the world, education-wise. We have phenomenal research institutions. We have commercializable technologies. We just don't do a great job commercializing them. Availability of training, image, brand, made in the USA, supply chain optimization, impact on domestic economy, infrastructure, so on and so forth. Now, Donald Trump was cited a few times, 83 times, in fact, over the course of these years, in terms of a reason for reshoring, associated with things like corporate tax cuts and so on. I don't want to get partisan here, but you know, I'm glad that he introduced this discussion of we need fair trade with China, not just free trade, and that we don't need to produce everything abroad. We can produce some of our own things here in America. I like that. And I think a lot of CEOs are buying into that notion, whether they like the president or not. Looking ahead, environmental considerations may become more relevant as emissions reductions initiatives continue. We all want a cleaner environment. And COVID-19 will further accelerate reshoring. So Maryland, it's time to act. When you think about trade wars and trade imbalances, one of the things we have is a very large trade deficit with the rest of the world. This gives you a sense of trade balances with the various significant trading partners back to 1985. But really, one country stands out here. It's the country in purple, China. Now, the trade deficit with China shrank in 2019 for obvious reasons. We put tariffs on a lot of Chinese products and made them less competitive. But still, that's the standout. And that, again, represents one of the factors here macroeconomically to think about reshoring, particularly from China. According to the International Economic Development Council, how do we encourage reshoring? Innovate. Well, we call ourselves a lot of things. We call ourselves the old line state. We call ourselves the free state. We call ourselves the land of pleasant living. We call ourselves America in miniature. But we can also call ourselves the R&D state. We do a ton of research and development, not out of the private sector, as it turns out, because we have a small manufacturing base, but in the institutional sector. Focus should be on building the vibrancy of the critical advanced manufacturing industry sector. That should be the focal point, a focal point. U.S. must strengthen the depth of the nation's regional advanced industry ecosystem. You know, more partnerships, collaborations between governments, companies, and individuals who work collectively to rebuild the nation's local skills pools, industrial innovation capacity, and supply chains. I mean, one of the problems with reshoring production to Maryland is that our supply chains have atrophied. The input producers are elsewhere. They might be in South Carolina or Texas. So if I'm a final assembler, why would I be in Maryland, perhaps? Because, you know, it makes more sense for me to be in Tennessee or Kentucky. These are real issues. Can't get around those. But again, government incentives, support for training can offset some of those disadvantages. Other recommendations include federal government should increase investment in R&D. Amen. Provide greater investment in broadband infrastructure. Oh yeah, absolutely. And including, you know where? Eastern Shore, Western Maryland, Southern Maryland. Because one of the things about rural economies is, yes, they support agriculture often. Right? You see a lot of agriculture in Kent County. You see agriculture in Cecil County. You see agriculture in much of the state of Maryland. Okay. But at the heart of these communities' historical successes, their ability to create and support large middle classes has been manufactured. So they offer a workforce. They have transportation connections to cities. Why? Because they're farmers and agricultural producers. So they had to have roads to bring goods to market. Those same roads, that same infrastructure can be used to transport manufactured items. And there's a reason Black & Decker put a plant in Easton in 1974. The workforce was there. The transportation linkages were there. So, but to operate in today's economy, you need broadband. And a lot of our state, too much of our state, I would say, is not connected with high-speed broadband. It's really put rural Maryland at a disadvantage during this COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, here's the biggie: increased focus on workforce development, building the nation's and the state's talent pool through training and education. I'm hitting the home stretch here, but I want to talk about a couple of other things. First, we have a new trade regime in North America, the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement. And An aspect of that agreement is that we have now new rules of origin. Rules of origin are the criteria used to define where a product was made and are important for implementing trade policy measures, including trade preferences. The rules of origin differ by product and by regional free trade agreement. We now have a new agreement in North America, the USMCA. Regional value content for autos. Under USMCA, automobiles must have 75% of their components manufactured in Mexico, the US, or Canada to qualify for zero tariffs. That fraction was 62.5% under NAFTA, or that proportion. So we have stronger rules of origin now. Even more reason to reshore to North America and the United States itself. In this case, I'm using automobiles as an example. So outlook for US reshoring, recent issues, as I say, the USMCA includes stronger rules of origin. That was, I think, the 2019 story. If you think about 2020, COVID-19 has disrupted supply chains and placed further strain on the relationship between the US and China. According to polls, oh, this is good. This is good stuff. According to polls by the American Chamber of Commerce in China and the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, in October, 66% of 25 large US companies surveyed said a decoupling of the US and China's economies would be impossible. Can't do it. Basu and other people can talk about it. Cannot be done. 2/3 of CEOs say it cannot be done. We cannot decouple. By March, 6 months later, and now we're into COVID-19, only 44% of large US companies said decoupling would be impossible. Things are moving very quickly out there. According to a Thomas survey in April of 878 North American manufacturing industrial sector professionals, 64% of manufacturers report they're likely to bring manufacturing production and sourcing back to North America, a 10% increase from the same sentiment reported in February. Let me repeat that. A 10% increase from February in terms of the number of people, manufacturers who believe they're going to bring manufacturing production and sourcing back to North America. So conclusion, final slide here. Look, I know there's some skepticism out there. Reshoring is real, but Maryland is not ready. It's too expensive. It's too hostile to business. I'm saying that. You may disagree. And relevant workforce isn't here. We haven't trained it. We don't have enough machinists. We don't have enough welders, so on and so forth. And I get it. It's a catch-22. It's a chicken and egg problem. Why would I train my workers for manufacturers' jobs that don't exist? But if you don't train people for those jobs, those manufacturing jobs will not come to exist. That's the dilemma. And really, it's only government that can coordinate that. Here are some places to start. More exposure to manufacturing occupations for high school juniors and seniors, and more partnerships between Maryland's manufacturing sector and two-year colleges. Incentives for large-scale reshores. Let's build that supply chain back quickly. People who want to create more than 1,000 jobs in Maryland through reshoring, yeah, let's give it away a little bit. Let's give it away, because that's what we have to do to offset our disadvantages. And the fact that the supply chain has atrophied over the course of decades here. Referenda that allow local communities to vote on right-to-work status. Ooh, maybe this is controversial. But you know what? Here's what I'm saying. We are not a right-to-work county. You know, in Dorchester County. Maybe Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County go a different direction. Fine, it's a big experiment. Let's see where the manufacturing employment jobs are being created, and then play follow the leader. And then finally, programs that induce people to shift from reliance on government assistance to independence, full community engagement, and a sense of individual pride. So can we, as we did in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was president, can we create opportunities for people who are currently on public assistance, provide them training opportunities, and move them to a life of financial independence, and you know, thereby create examples for their community and for others, including loved ones. Just a thought. And with that, Mike, thanks a lot. I'll take questions in our remaining 13 minutes together.
Anirban, thank you so much. That's so inspiring. And I just want to say in general, you're helping to underscore a very important fact. We're not going to go back to work. We're going to go forward to work. That we are clearly in a period of change, and those people that enjoy creating a future, this is our time to make manufacturing a priority. And you are really giving us so much of the direction for that to happen. I know reshoring is really important. I just learned an awful lot, But I think it's important to realize it's no longer business as usual, folks. We're in a new era, and we need to figure out new and different ways to become architects of our future. And I believe, Anirban, you made a compelling case that making manufacturing a priority is the way we need to go. So with that, and Stacy Smith, are you there? Because Stacy is going to help me with these questions. At the end, we got a lot of questions, but let me jump to, is Chris West, or Chris, can you unmute? Are you on the line, Senator West? Okay, I think I got a question from him. It says, and here it is, about what would be a disruptive incentive that a county could implement, maybe it wasn't Chris, that a county could implement to attract more manufacturing that isn't offered by the state already? That might have been a different Chris.
Well, I think it's two-year colleges, right? So if you're talking about local communities, what control do they have over higher education? You know, even Prince George's County doesn't have control of the University of Maryland College Park, but what it does have some authority over is its local community college, including acting as a significant source of funding for a community college. Same thing in Baltimore City and other places. So that's the place. I mean, it's the magic, I think, happens largely at two-year colleges. But here's the thing. You want to first offer programs for, you know, to become machinists or welders, so on and so forth, millwrights, whatever it happens to be, at the two-year college level. But you've got to, if you're going to stand up those programs with the assistance of local governments, you've got to also have students who want to enter those programs. Because it's not enough to stand up a program, you've got to have it being, you know, be financially viable, financially sustainable. So that's where the growing awareness of manufacturing as the next American growth industry, which it may very well be, why it matters so much to communicate that to folks who are juniors and seniors in high school, if not sooner than that. But again, it takes a real coordinating effort by local governments, by two-year colleges, by state government to turn this thing around so that people understand, you know, the panoply of opportunities that face us. So, you know, that's my answer to that question.
Stacy, are you there?
Yep.
Okay. Did you have a question, or you want me to? I can jump in, or you can jump in. Go ahead.
I like what Michael Raphael writes, and Anirban, I'll just read this and maybe just comment. He said, we need to better leverage our federal labs and military bases, our universities and hospitals, and our large corporations to foster innovation, develop new tech and products, and then work to keep it here for manufacturing. This age of Zoom, we need to increase intercommunications between all these groups. It will work. Thoughts?
That's absolutely right. So our commercialization engine is very weak. So we have all this research and development that takes place at the National Institutes of Health, at the Food and Drug Administration, at Aberdeen Proving Ground, at the National Security Agency, you know, at Pax River, so on and so forth, you know, Fort Detrick, Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland. I mean, you know, and we, for whatever reason, are incapable of translating a lot of that intellectual property into commercializable technologies, into jobs. And some of this is because of institutional culture. You know, the notion of commercialization would pervert the research agenda, right? Creates an incentive to do other than pure research, maybe even biased results. But Stanford has gotten over that. MIT got over that. You know, I mean, people have gotten over that. And that's where you see the real innovation. You know, University of Texas in Austin got over that. University of Michigan got over that. So, you know, we have to get over it. You know, we have not produced, you know, one Pfizer, one Merck, one Biogen, you know, we haven't produced one massive biotech company. I mean, we've had MedImmune and Human Genome Sciences and so on and so forth, but nothing massive. Even though we're home to FDA and NIH, it's almost impossible that we wouldn't have created even one company of that ilk. And so that's a source of frustration to me. I mean, we talk about cybersecurity and all these kinds of things, but a lot of the gigantic cybersecurity companies are not in Maryland, as it turns out. So that's what I think the comment is getting at, and we need to do a better job. I say, I'm chair of the Maryland Economic Development Commission, and I say all the time, please help me understand what it is to have an entrepreneurial ecosystem. What does that mean? Because I keep hearing that Silicon Valley has an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and so does Boston, and, you know, so does Austin, so on and so forth. So does Raleigh-Durham. What is it, And how can we have it here in Maryland? Because clearly we don't have it here in Maryland. So that's part of the discussion.
So Anirban, Michelle Welly has asked this question, and I want to comment. It's what is the potential impact on port cargo business with reshoring of products and or components now produced by offshore? And would you also explain to people that when the state reports their export numbers, that those are not necessarily goods or services that were produced in Maryland? A lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, so a couple of things, you know, with respect to Michelle's question, and Michelle Welly I consider her to be a very good friend, and she's an extraordinarily talented person. So I'm glad she's on here. So with respect to that, so, you know, ships come into the Port of Baltimore and are unloaded. And often the ships that come into the Port of Baltimore are a lot fuller than the ships that go back out. Why is that? Because we run a trade deficit in goods. We run a trade surplus in services, but you don't transport services by ship. So we run a massive trade deficit in goods. And so, you know, one of the goals here is to balance this out macroeconomically. You know, for us to have a better balance between exports and imports, it actually matters for the, you know, the sort of the country's balance sheet, for us to be in better balance. And so, you know, part of the goal is if you reshore more production, if you have larger economies of scale in America, you probably end up bolstering your export sector as well. So not only are you substituting for imports by reshoring, but you probably have a greater basis to export to the rest of the world, thereby closing your trade gap, whether with the Chinese or other nations. So that's, you know, that's the goal. Now, with respect to the export data, you're absolutely right, Mike, that for instance, when we see natural gas shipped out of that large LNG terminal in Calvert County, that natural gas is by and large produced in Pennsylvania. It's supporting Pennsylvania jobs. It shows up as a Maryland export because it's leaving a Maryland facility for destinations abroad. But a lot of the exports that go out of the Port of Baltimore are not produced in Maryland. And so that's part of this reshoring story as well.
Thank you. Stacy? Oh, Stacy, you're on mute.
Got it. Sorry. Ken asked the question. I think it's a good one. Do you have any suggestions to help get more at-risk kids into technical schools that could feed directly into manufacturers?
Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, actually, I know some people roll their eyes when they hear the words Kirwan Commission. I know that. But there was an element of the Kirwan Commission that is extremely valuable, I think. There's more than one element, but just one element stands out to me in particular in the context of this conversation, which is the notion that you'd have a separate pathway to graduation, that a student could obtain a vocational certificate to graduate from school. Oh, that's beautiful. And we've got to, you know, I think, have the message out there, send out the message that whatever way you graduate, graduation is graduation. There is no better path. It's not that the vocational certificate is inferior as a path of graduation than the other more formal path of passing tests and college preparedness and so on and so forth. And I'm not arguing against that path either. I'm saying that our kids deserve to have more than one path to success. And they deserve to have access to all the opportunities that are available to them, the opportunities that fit their personality, their wants, their needs, their desires, their aspirations. So, you know, I think that's where you make it happen. You know, in those later years in high school, junior and senior years, where a lot of kids are not going on to college, right? Because right now they have only one path. Okay, I really don't want to go to college, but I don't know what else to do. I'm going to go to a 2-year college. They end up spending a year in remedial math and remedial reading. They get lost. They lose hope, and all of a sudden you've lost a kid. Whereas if they graduate and they've got a vocational certificate and they're connected to an employer, they're not lost. They're on their way. A good welder in this country can make low 6 figures. There's no shame in that. Not that money's everything. But the point is, you end up creating a larger middle class. So I think that's the answer to that question. You know, we started with that process, and the Kirwan Commission, I get it, it's expensive, and I'm not talking about every aspect of the Kirwan Commission for purpose of this conversation, but that separate pathway to graduation, I think we have to do that in Maryland, and that manufacturing would be one of the main beneficiaries of those vocational certificates.
Mike, can I ask one more?
Yeah, go ahead, Stace.
I like the question Haresh submitted. As we talk about lower productivity in millennials or possible increased costs because of reshoring, should we talk about the role of automation, robotics, and machine learning in manufacturing? Would sound policy or incentive programs that navigates and encourages the manufacturers to navigate towards advanced manufacturing be helpful?
Right. Well, in this case, I think the market does a lot of the work, right? So a manufacturer is trying to use the technologies that allow them to get to market fastest with the highest quality at the lowest possible price to underbid competitors. So, I mean, in some places, government has a major role, but in others, you leave it to the private sector to determine what technologies they need to use. Now, that said, if these technologies are emerging, whether robotics or 3D printing or whatever it happens to be, artificial intelligence, and those technologies relate to manufacturing, which a couple of those at least clearly do, then it makes sense, doesn't it, to make sure that in our high schools or vocational schools, or which we call career and technical education schools, because we don't want anyone to know that we're talking about vocational training, but that's what we're talking about. And then our 2-year schools and our 4-year colleges and our graduate programs, to have them focus on those emerging technologies so that we're the first to produce a workforce that can use those new technologies. So all of a sudden, when the reshoring takes place, it doesn't go to Rhode Island or Texas, it comes to Maryland. Why does it come to Maryland? Oh, they have the workers that can work with 3D printing. They have the workers that can relate artificial intelligence to cybersecurity and manufacturing. They're the ones. So we're going to Maryland. I'm coming to you, Baltimore. So that's the game here. That's the goal here.
Well, Anirban, thank you so much. We're at the bewitching hour, so to speak. This has been, and unfortunately, we have more questions. So, Stacy, anybody have any? We can post those questions. We just don't have time, Anirban, to go through them all. So, any thoughts on people that ask questions that we didn't get answers to?
Look, I'll say this. If they're good questions, I'll answer them. And I know, by the way, they're all good questions.
They're all good questions. You know what? They're all good questions. Hey, Anirban, we'll figure out something. We'll get them over to you, and maybe we can, Stacy, figure out a way we can get some response to them. But Anirban, I do need to clarify something for the group because there was a little bit of misinformation that you gave. Yes, I am ready to retire, but I'm not quite as old as you made me out. So I'm going to show the group what I showed everybody earlier. This is me in the early 70s, okay?
Oh, sorry, 70s.
All right.
I didn't know.
Not 50s, not 50s, 70s.
I didn't know.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
I was guessing. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry if I've offended you.
No, you didn't offend me. Gosh almighty, man, you're my friend.
Okay. All right,
so, and plus, it's time for another kind of revolution in manufacturing. I appreciate everybody being on this. I think you can see from the spirit of this conversation and of presentation that we're very serious about changing the dynamics for Maryland manufacturing. It's no longer go along to get along. We're organizing a kind of a coalition of the willing. The people that want to change the dynamics so we can realize the kind of wealth building that Anirban is talking about for the state of Maryland. So, so with that, I do want to thank everybody. Check out our website. We have 2 more webinars coming up. The last one is for manufacturers only, but the next one I think is going to be a really good presentation on some of the factors that we need to look at in order to achieve some of our results. Not my dog. So with that, is anybody, Anirban, do you have anything to say? Stacy, Peter?
No, I just want to say I look forward to the 3rd webinar, and it's conceivable that we'll have an opportunity to address some of these questions during that 3rd webinar as well. So. Okay.
All righty. And again, Stacy, this is all going to be on our website, right? A recording of this?
Yeah, and I'll send the recording this afternoon, a link as well.
Okay.
In a follow-up email.
All right. Well, listen, again, thank you to all our sponsors and for all of you for joining us today, and have a great weekend. Bye now.